Okay. Let's start with who you are and your relationship to Rob.
Well, that'll be the day.
My father was Robert George, I'm Robert Allen, and Rob was Robert Douglas. He would have been 1950. I was 10 years old, and when he was a kid, he was a pain in the neck. I used to sit in the back of the car, and he just drove me crazy. About 1956, they went to London. Yeah, they came back, and then we moved to Mattawa. I think it's probably the first time he heard about skiing, because we helped build the Mattawa Ski Club. For some reason, I had to pick up dynamite for the ski club. I guess I was going out that night, and I took the stuff out of the car and put it in my bedroom. Peggy found out the next morning that I had this dynamite in the house. Probably heard Peggy saying, "Dynamite! Ski hill! Believe it or not, maybe that stuck in Rob's mind, and later on he wanted to go to Whistler. Who knows? I have no idea. But
we were new students at University of Toronto pre-med. We kind of became good buddies early on. We were a little different than a lot of the people in the class. I mean, we weren't even sure we wanted to be doctors. I mean, we both had kind of longish hair, like partying. He was a bit of a dandy. I mean, he loved dressing in the clothes of the day, well known for his pink velvet pants and fancy shoes. But he was really smart. We didn't really give a shit if we didn't get into medicine at that time. I think it was the first summer, Rob came up with this idea, and he says we could get jobs with the Toronto ambulance. The only problem was they required like military-style haircuts. And one day we went to a wig shop, and we're trying on wigs. I said, I'm not going to do this. And Rob did. He went out and he bought a wig, showed up, and joined the ambulance service. And I can't believe nobody noticed that he had this wig. And there was one particular day, drives up to the intersection, takes off his wig, and shakes out his hair, turns his head, and his partner is in his truck, but never noticed that he actually had long hair. And then we decided that we had to do some more serious climbing, and that was when we climbed Abbott's Pass above Lake Louise. Oh, that was ridiculous. We had no gear at all, and it turned out that the route that we went up was called the Death Trap. We climbed up to this pass, and it was amazing. Like 9,600 feet, this hut that was built in 1922, this stone hut that was built there. I remember climbing up on one of the ridges, sitting on a ridge and reading Kurt Vonnegut, and this friggin' climbing party comes by, like full ropes and all the gear. They thought we were just crazy. All we could hear was continuous avalanches coming off and going down this pass. So yeah, we ran down the pass and basically turned the corner, and a big avalanche came down and just filled the pass. I mean, when you're young and lucky, nothing happens. We kind of decided that after we left Banff that, mountains were going to be in our future. And so I said, we really should apply to St. Paul's because, it's close to Whistler, it's on the coast, that's where we want to go. So then he went traveling for a year. Some of it he was by himself. He went to Hawaii for a while and kind of hung out in Hawaii. And so then he and Carol went to Southeast Asia. And then he went up to Everest Base Camp. And I think he was hiking by himself then. And I know somehow his dad knew Edmund Hillary. And Rob went to one of the hospitals in the Everest region that Hillary built and met him. Maybe it was a sign of what he was going to end up doing. So we'd heard that Whistler was looking for somebody to be on the patrol and be a physician.
Well, it would have been late 70s when he applied for a patrol job, came up, I guess, from Vancouver for an interview, arrived in his shiny red Porsche, was doing donuts in the snow-covered parking lot. Roger led the interview. I was Roger's assistant at the time. Young, brash, it looked like trouble, but keen, and keen to learn. And he wanted to be more than a ski patrol doc. He wanted to be a full-on patroller. And he became that pretty damn quick.
I was the patrol director. We were a long way from major medical capability. What we really needed was a doctor. I hunted around and I met Rob somewhere. We just hit it off right away. He asked me, well, do I get to ski? And I said, look him right in the eye and I say, only the steepest and the deepest. And if I had a nickel for every time he threw that at me, was just Rob all the time, just grinding. Rob never seemed to be disturbed. He'd be right there. You know, he just arrived on the scene, did the assessments, you know, back injuries, neck injuries, fractured femurs. I mean, this is difficult stuff. Huh? And it's not like you're, you know, sitting in a clinic. You know, you're 5,000 feet up a mountain. You know, you watch Rob run a toboggan. He didn't weigh that much, but he'd just haul a mail. I mean, I'm glad I was never in the toboggan with him. You know, we didn't have the peak chair, and so we'd bomb the cornices out of the helicopter. That would be sort of hit and miss, too. So we did a lot of drilling, and then we'd drop a bomb in there with a detonator on it. I was out on the cornice. Yeah, I'm in a harness, and the rope's going back to Rob. The cornice is broken, and I'm on top of it.
And Roger's left dangling on this big cornice that fell.
I was sort of hanging around going, what the hell happened there? And I mean, you know, it's life and death. Huh? Rob's on the belay. He's wanting to lower me down. I'm going, no, I'm not going down. I'm going up. Because it was a big avalanche. I think we went and drank a couple of beers after that. One of the things I used to do was, okay, guys, get your skis on. We're going out for group Hummer. Well, a group Hummer was, the guys got out there, got their skis on, and we would ski as fast as we possibly could to whatever lift we were going to. You know, there'd be 8 or 10 guys, you know, and they'd be jostling for position, trying to knock one guy out of the way, and there'd be skis flying through the air. I mean, it was crazy. But who's in the middle of that? Rob.
It was terrifying. And Rob, being as aggressive and competitive as he was always trying to be in the lead.
And he's full elbows, you know? And these guys are traveling at 30 miles an hour, and they're pushing each other out of the way, and it's craziness.
Well, there were a lot of practical jokes, and Rob was right in on all of them. If you left early for the season, you had to look out because there could be trouble. There was the ferret cage, which Rob was instrumental in creating, and that was 2 litters, patrol baskets that you'd put onto the toboggan, and they'd clamshell the 2 together, and the poor patroller that was leaving would get in the middle of it and then get dragged around behind a snowmobile in the snow, and then stood up, strapped to a spine board down at Dusty's, and fed who knows what liquor. There was another end of season deal, and we were still on the mountain, and the drinking had begun, I have to admit to that. It was sweep time for whatever reason. So back then our patrol room was upstairs in the Alpine Service Building, and there was a flight of steel stairs down to a door that opened up under the hill. And I'm not sure why, but Rob was up the top of the stairs with his skis on, and he skied down those metal stairs and out onto the slope. And I thought he was going to kill himself, but somehow he pulled it off. It wasn't good for his skis, but he made it. It was difficult when he was on the patrol because I was supposed to be his boss. Rob never really did report to anyone, other than Jen.
Well, in the 70s, we were a one-horse town. Blackcomb wasn't there. The village was just being built.
There was no doctor. There was no clinic. You know, we're doing medivacs. People are skiing way too fast. They're hitting trees. We got to fly them out. There's car accidents happening out in the middle of the road in the middle of the night. Rob was getting hauled out of bed, deliver babies, all kinds of stuff.
He'd get called out at 3 o'clock in the morning to patch up guys than in a bar fight.
All of a sudden, we need a clinic. We just used to have this first aid room. Guys used to sleep in there overnight. They drank too much, you know. And he just saw it from a much higher level, and he understood what the role of the ski patrol was, what the role of the clinic was. How should it get developed? How should it integrate with provincial standards? Rob said we need to put a trailer in there.
Liquor store was in a trailer, post office was in a trailer, everything was in a trailer. It was pretty primitive in those days.
And sure enough, you know, he got organized, we got a trailer in there, and that became the first aid room for probably the first, 2-3 years.
Then he started taking appointments. So this is as he sort of gradually moved away from full-time ski patrolling and full-time being a doc in the valley.
Rob just carried his role into the development of the clinic. Rob was absolutely the founder, the creator of all the protocols that dealt with people both coming in and leaving out of here.
He was basically, him and Christine were the basis of the medical system here.
He was the first full-service family practice physician that did longitudinal care, like looked after everybody, looked after their entire families. That's what set the tone for the Whistler Medical Clinic, which is right now the only clinic that does full-service family practice, looks after the entire family. And he did that at a time when all the support services weren't here. He was a really well-respected physician with Alpine Canada. He traveled with them for years and looked after all the athletes and taught me, again, everything that I know about that.
We had a woman who was climbing the northwest ridge of Wedge Mountain. She fell probably 5,000 feet anyway. She was dead on the ice. There was crevasses everywhere, but as we flew in there was a black bear moving up on the ice. There was a lightning storm going on the peak of Wedge, and the noise was just mind-boggling, and this bear is cruising around, and picking up scents, and the helicopter couldn't get back in, and so he flew around 3 or 4 times. The bear's coming up the ice. We're standing there. I don't even have a ski pole to whack him with. And eventually, we get everybody in the helicopter. We take off, and the bear takes off. And the weirder it got, the more Rob loved it. And he'd get that look, and it'd be just like a mischievous little kid. And you knew that Rob's getting ready to do something really different, crank it up. Just his personality was just so volatile, and just hang on, Rob's here, what's going to happen?
He got a lot of enjoyment out of the humor of life.
You had to be able to hear his jokes, and if you could hear his jokes, they were really, really funny.
He could give it out, but he didn't like getting it.
Underneath that sort of playful, mischievous character was a pretty serious and a really good doctor. Rob fancied himself as a ladies' man. He was pretty effective. He was young. He was a doctor, good looking. And he would go after what seemed to be the unattainable.
So the first time I met Jan, she was living in a teepee off the West Side Road.
She was a bartender at the Christiana. One evening, Greg Griffiths and Rob came in. They were heading to a party in the Sioux Valley. He didn't introduce Rob to her because he just assumed that Rob knew her. And nothing really happened, and a few months later, she was at Le Something, and it was a discotheque where Dusty's then became. Everyone was dancing away, and Rob was kind of standing off to the side, and she said to him, "How come you're not dancing?" And he said, "Well, nobody's asked me." She said, "Well, why don't you ask me?" He says, "I don't do that." And so she asked him, and they danced, and that was it.
And at that point in time, Jan had developed a new boyfriend, and it turned out the new boyfriend was the keeper.
And Jan was probably the most unattainable because she was already in a relationship, as far as I know, with probably the toughest guy in the valley. But that did not deter Rob. He just went right after it and somehow pried Jan away from her previous boyfriend and didn't get beaten up, as far as I know. Well, there were always the patrol parties, and Jan worked on the mountain as a mountain host or a Twinkie. So the Twinkies and the patrol would get together, and sometimes sparks would fly.
I remember their wedding completely, like it was yesterday.
You know, they were so connected. You don't see that in too many marriages.
Now where have I seen that before?
Okay, Mickey, got it.
The Whistler Rob quickly settled into the idea of living on the lake, developed into a family man very quickly with 2 lovely children, and Rob was definitely the family man, not the Porsche and the long hair guy.
He always talked about his family because that was the most important thing to him. I heard stories about everyone, and he was just enthralled with his family. That was his life. That was his whole, reason for living.
You start to deal with medical issues, it just complete change. It's like just you threw a switch.
He taught me, like seriously, when I say almost everything I know, like almost everything I know about examining knees, shoulders, elbows. His physical exam skills were exceptional. So that was fantastic to work with.
I mean, he didn't need an MRI to tell you what was wrong with your knee. And he really felt bad for people that had to pay out of pocket.
He had a short fuse. And you never wanted to light it. People would make fun of him for how short his chart notes were. They'd say, the guy doesn't write anything. I'm like, but what he writes, is it the right diagnosis? Yeah.
He would always spread out his appointments for his medical practice. He seemed to line up all his geriatric buddies.
He brought the friendship part into his office, but I think it was really done to make me feel a little bit more relaxed.
And Rob always said that's because you old guys have so many complaints and so many things that I have to deal with. But it was really because Rob wanted more time to talk about his golf game.
You could expect to be at least waiting 20 minutes to see him because he finished going on about what you need to do in your health and then describe all his problems with his golf swing.
Rob played a lot of golf and we really enjoyed our golf together. Rob always used to play in the Fall Guys group, that there was a number of us who went away for 20 years and a member at Big Sky.
He would always say, I'm gonna quit. This sucks. I'm terrible. I mean, every now and then he would play an incredibly good round of golf. Like, who is this guy, right? But the best round of golf that I ever witnessed, all he sang to himself during the round was Tom Petty's Don't Back Down. He had one of the best golf rounds I've ever seen him play.
He would just sing forever until people told him to shut up.
Believe it or not, his voice, when he started singing, he was a dead clone for Rod Stewart.
Well, he was Rod Stewart, there's no question.
He could sing. He could just belt out a number.
And he knew all the lyrics, not just for Rod Stewart, but all the Beatles. He knew all these obscure facts about all the bands.
He should have been in a band. He could really, really sing.
He was the only guy that I know of that was at Woodstock in '69.
He is the only person I know that was actually there. And it's a true story.
Once I heard that, that really kind of set him apart in my mind.
Yeah, he told us about Woodstock and like, wow. It's just like, he was quite the musical guy. He liked his music. He always loved the shows. I think that was one way he could really sort of relieve the tension of 9 to 5. But he was a music guy. There's no two ways about that.
Wow. Wow, he's right. All right.
kids grew up, and we had time to travel.
You know, when we did our trips to France, for example, it was Jan and myself and Rob that would go riding together. We were just the threesome that went riding through these beautiful roads and gorgeous countryside in France, stopped for a glass of rosé and maybe some oysters or something like that. And we just celebrated the time we were together. So bike riding was a big thing.
Shitty formation flying there, Captain.
The favorite thing that we all did together was mountain biking, and we did a trip every year back in the day.
He was always keen to go and always really good on those uphill climbs, which always annoyed me.
Rob didn't do anything slowly, and so the mountain bike was pretty adventurous.
And Rob was the only one to ever get injured on that trip. Going downhill, he had a flat tire, went straight over the handlebars. But at least at the end of the day, we were able to take a cold beer and put it right onto all of his road rash, and that solved the problem.
Our Moab trips were fun. We used to go on the Moab, and we were out doing this shuttle ride. It was about a 5-hour ride, and we were about halfway through it, come around the corner, and here's this poor guy, face down in the dirt on the side of the trail, and he'd gone over the handlebars on his motorcycle. Doc looks him over, and this is not a pretty picture here. And Doc would keep running back to check this guy out, and he'd come back and say, if they don't get here soon, you guys are going to watch me do CPR, because this guy's going to die. And all of a sudden, there's a helicopter on the scene, like that. Doc tells the first man on the scene, okay, this is my prognosis of what's going on. And when he got to emergency, it was exactly what Doc said. Flail chest, said he knew exactly what he was doing. And he certainly owes his life to Doc. I mean, if he left to his own devices out there, he probably would have expired. But and then, of course, 2 days later, Doc crashes himself. But that's a story for another time.
Right, how's the weather looking? Perfect. Morning, heli skiers. All right. Good morning.
We heli skied. We flew to the peak of Wedge, 9,200 feet. We're flying in at the land right on the peak of Wedge. And I pop the door to get out, and he grabs me and he says, there's nothing underneath you. The heli ski guys, I think, really felt comfortable because they had a doctor with them in case anything ever went sideways. So he heli guided people out there who were from all over the world to go ski in the Canadian mountains.
You know, when we had Jean Chrétien heli skiing, yes, have a doctor on board. And I think Rob really loved that part of his being a doctor, that he got to do all these special things.
We were Whistler heli skiing, and we were very happy to have Rob join the team. You know, it's an adventurous experience out there, and if anything goes wrong, you want someone like Rob to be out there. He learned very quickly that he didn't want to guide full-time because he didn't know all the terrain, and what he wanted to do was tail guide, so he could basically just ski. And he said he only wanted to guide in the private groups, and that they should request a doctor. So we created that spot for him so that Rob could do 6 or 8 or 10 runs in a day and really not have to worry about anything. He liked to go fast. He was really fast. So if we're out there heli skiing, he was probably one of the fastest powder skiers you've ever seen in your life.
He was quite comfortable in the backcountry, but
Rob got to do everything.
I got the call from Mickey. And what do you say? I spent time with him at the very end.
It's still a little surreal. I haven't really, I don't think, come to terms with it yet. So he was a good person to know, that's for sure, and a good friend. He led a pretty solid, full-on life.
He just won't be replaced. You know, I miss him. When he passed, I had a tough time. So I really miss him. It's a big hole.
It's hard to believe he's gone. He was so much a part of our lives. So it was just so unfortunate to think that he was the one that tried to keep us healthy, and he was struck with some awfully bad luck with his health. And I'll always remember him. It's very sad.
Just couldn't believe that he could get ill. It just wasn't the way it was supposed to be. But,
The dock, meaning the dock on the lake here, it's just not the same without Doc down there. I mean, it's still beautiful and that, but you know, it's missing that guy.
Love you, Rob.
We would have had a lot more adventures together, and I will miss those greatly.
you know, it should have been my dad, me, and Rob should still be around here. It's just amazing that he's not here.
I think that few people understood the gift that he was to this community. To develop the Whistler Medical Clinic from the beginning and to do that from scratch was a Herculean task. Rob went from this young sports medicine doctor to the leader of our community as the chairman of the medical society, and it was well deserved, and he's a huge loss to our community.
Member for West Vancouver, C2 Sky.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to recognize Dr. Rob Burgess for his outstanding contribution to the practice of medicine in Whistler. Serving as a physician in Whistler for 43 years, it's clear Burgess leaves behind an enormous legacy, which will carry on through a Whistler Healthcare Foundation fund set up in his name, which will support primary care initiatives in the Sea to Sky corridor to ensure that Rob's vision of a relationship-based longitudinal care for everyone in Whistler lives on. Mr. Speaker, he will be missed. Thank you.
It weighs heavily on me to make sure that this legacy is really well used and really makes people aware of the fact that we have family practice in Whistler, because he initiated it and was so committed and passionate to the concept of looking after families and people and doing it in a relationship-based way. That's the benchmark now, is to live up to that.